Hi everybody. Today's 5-minute video is on Medicaid. So what is the Medicaid program and how do you become eligible for it? From a baseline standpoint, the Medicaid program is the state program that will pay for your long-term care costs. So in-home caregivers, stays in a skilled nursing facility. Medicaid program picks up the tab for those expenses in the event that you don't have the money to pay for them yourself out of pocket. One very important distinction, Medicaid is very different from Medicare. So just because you have Medicare, Medicare isn't necessarily going to cover those costs. At best, Medicare covers a 100-day stay in a skilled nursing facility, so 100 days of that long-term care services, but beyond that 100 days, Medicare cuts off. So again, at that point, you're either coming out of pocket, or if you don't have the funds, you can apply for the state Medicaid program. Medicaid has very strict eligibility requirements. Essentially, the state says they want you to spend all of your resources before they're going to step in and pay for your care. So the state says you really have to spend down your 401k, your IRA, your bank accounts, cash in those life insurance policies if they have any cash surrender value. They really say spend down anything and everything you can to get to the level of assets that they say it's okay for you to keep. And that level of assets that the state says it's okay for you to keep and still be eligible for Medicaid is $1,600. As soon as you get below that $1,600 in assets, you can become eligible for Medicaid. And there's a couple assets that are, or types of assets, I should say, they're not going to count towards that $1,600 number, that are going to be non-countable assets. And the biggest example of that is your house. So long as you or your spouse or a dependent child, for example, are living in the house, the state cannot force you to sell the house to pay for your costs because they don't want to kick people out on the street and say, I'm forcing you to sell your home, now leaving people in a really bad position. So long as you or your spouse are living in the house is exempt, or it's a non-countable asset and does not count towards that $1,600 number. There's a few other assets that they say you're allowed to keep, but that list is really pretty small. But for example, they do say you can also have a prepaid funeral contract for under a certain dollar amount is okay to keep. Some very small life insurance policies are okay to keep, and there's a few other assets that fall under that list. But generally speaking, the state says really go and spend down all of your assets, get below that $1,600 number, then you're going to be eligible for Medicaid. One important thing to note is that when we're talking about married couples, that the state looks at married couples as a joint financial unit. So it's not a solution if one spouse has to apply for Medicaid and the other spouse doesn't. Transferring all the assets to the spouse that is not applying for Medicaid, or what we call the community spouse, the spouse that's remaining in the community, that's not necessarily going to protect those assets either. So just be very mindful of that. Also, there's the issue of income. So the Medicaid program has the $1,600 Medicaid asset threshold that you have to get beneath. But then the state also looks at your income too. So if you're getting Social Security every month or a pension, once you apply for Medicaid, you don't get to keep that income. That income is now going to be diverted and go towards your cost. So it's going to go to the caregivers or that skilled nursing facility, with the exception of they do allow you to keep some of that income to pay for medical premiums, medical insurance premiums, and also a $75 a month allowance. But generally speaking, the bulk of your income is going to be going to your caregivers, to the skilled nursing facility. There is an exception to, or a small exception again, to the $1,600 rule, to the income rule, in that if you're a married couple and the spouse that's not applying for Medicaid still needs some assets just to be able to have, and you know, the state doesn't want to impoverish the spouse that's not going into the nursing home. So they say the spouse that's not going to the nursing home, again, that community spouse, is allowed to keep a certain percentage of the marital assets, up to a maximum of about $130,000. So there's some ability to preserve assets. And also to that community spouse, if they don't have enough income on their own, so if their Social Security, if their pensions aren't enough to cover those really important day-to-day expenses, so the utilities and the mortgage and such, there's the potential to defer some of the assets, some of the income that's coming into the spouse that's applying for Medicaid back to that community spouse. So again, there's the potential to preserve some assets there, but not a lot. So in summary, you really have to spend down all your assets if you want to become eligible for Medicaid, get below that $1,600 number, and to the extent you have additional income coming in the form of a pension or Social Security, for example, that's likely going to be diverted to the nursing home as well.